Excellent. Well, please join me in prayer. Father in heaven, our desire is to honor you. I pray that you would be with us tonight in this meeting, guide and direct our questions and our answers. I pray that you would lead and guide us individually as we think about how we can participate in or what our approach is going to be towards this church plant, and please guide and direct our church. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, it might be helpful for me just to give you a quick update on where the elders are at. Now, I know that for some of you, looking at this from the outside, you've been wondering, boy, why is this taking so long, right? If this was a clear choice, right, shouldn't this be going quicker? But Pastor Nick and Mike, they've both talked about a number of the different factors that we've had to walk through. It's been a very dynamic situation that we've been walking through. And I'd say instead of seeing it as a potential liability, I think we're at a place where we can look back and see it as a positive. We've had a lot of time to reflect on this, go through a lot of different questions. And so now we're at a place where we're feeling pretty confident, and we're recommending that the congregation moves forward. Okay. Well, all right. So I don't have a lot else to say, so why don't we open it up to you guys? If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and one of us will run around and bring you a microphone.
I guess the major concern that I have in general, I'm favor for it, is are the members at Crossroads willing to be baptized by immersion and become, or if not, then you just have pretty much a subset of a church plant of the original people being non-voting members for that, and that doesn't seem like it could go well.
Sure. Yeah, so we've talked about that probably for the last 6, 8, 9 months. It was one of the first things on the table, and talked to some of them this morning. And I think the gracious solution is those who membership's important to them, and most of them have been members in church all their lives, which means 60 years plus, is to receive them as members. Moving forward, anybody that joins the church, becomes a member, follows, or we think the scripture reads, and that's that you're baptized upon your confession of faith, which rules out infant baptism, and that's moving forward. So there would be a gracious exception for them, and everything else would be values, DNA, theology, doctrine of High Point moves over.
Okay, I feel like I need to clarify on this, that this is not something the elders have agreed to.
Right.
The last time the elders talked about it, the answer was absolutely not from the elders. Generally speaking, that was partly because the idea was that this was going to be a campus of High Point Church. So now that we have determined the best way to do this is to have a distinct church plant over there, for it to be its own thing, it does reopen the question of what will we do now as that separate organization decides to do what it's going to do when we plant it, which I'm sure will be a Credo Baptist Church. So we have discussed with them that our view is Credo Baptism, that if we take over the church, they would not be able to be members unless they were baptized on their own profession of faith. And they've recognized that and agreed to it in offering the church to us. I have argued that we should make some kind of exception for them, but the elders have not come to any other conclusion other than the last time the elders voted on this, it was they cannot become members unless they're baptized on their own profession of faith. But they still, I mean, even if we utilize our polity, they'll still be able to come to all the meetings, express their view, talk, all that kind of stuff as well. They just wouldn't be able to vote. But yeah, this is an area where Mike and I have just been, the elders have not been on the same page. We are apparently theological squishes or something. But I very much do believe, though, that in the conviction of Credo Baptism, and I believe that if we plant a church, it should be a Credo Baptist church. So there's no disagreement at all about that on our elder board.
Monty intimated that maybe there were some things in flux as we've been going through some of this. I was wondering if you could just kind of sift those out, if we're in a different place than we were a while ago, or if we are basically in the same place. Maybe I
Yeah.
just feel like I need to be brought up to date.
Yeah. So I guess there are maybe 4 logistical challenges. One was just the relational challenge of this. They didn't know us and they were trying to figure out what they wanted to do. So was it going to be yes or no for them? Was a big question for months, right? The second thing I think was, could we overcome some of the doctrinal differences? They're a Christian Reformed church. We're a Baptist-y church. And so there were some probably baptism was the biggest one, but then there are other distinctive Reformed doctrines that we didn't know where they stood and how Reformed they were. And it turned out they weren't. They were very broadly Reformed. So that was not a problem. The third thing is that there were some significant facility issues. Even though they redid the building during COVID and spent a bunch of money to make it nice, they didn't fix any of the mechanicals, which some of them date back to the 70s. And so to fix all that stuff, as Boyd was working through it, he's trying to be careful with the bids, and so they were big. And so when we first looked at how much it would really cost to fix the place, it was like 1.4 million or something. It felt like a lot, right? It was still less than half of the value of the property, but it still was a lot, right? And then we're like, do we need to tear this building down? But new construction would be like 10 million. This is crazy. It was some of that stuff. And there were a few moments where we weren't even sure we could fix it. So there was one point where Boyd was like, look, if the duct that goes under the building is inhibited, we can't fix it. We'd have to run all new ductwork. It would be crazy. And so there was one meeting where we're like, well, maybe we just can't do this. And somebody was like, well, let's find out. And we were like, okay, well, and so we just had to we had to put it off until we found out. So there was a bunch of that stuff. And then there was some financial negotiation in terms of the building, because the building has income and because they've supported a number of missionaries for a while, there was some question of would you be willing to support our missionaries for a little while? What would that be? How much money would that be? What commitments are you willing to make? There was some negotiation there. That wasn't really a very difficult negotiation, but it hung in the air for a little bit. Mostly it was a trust building process that just took a long time. But the flux of it really was, a lot of it was just the building, the mechanicals, and the bids on those mechanicals and what could be fixed and what couldn't. We thought, for example, we might have to do the whole roof. That would have been 200 to 250K. And since then, we were able to patch the flat part of the roof for $10,000 and get a few more years at least out of it. And there's also a roofing company that's owned by some church members that have offered to do the roof at cost when it's time to do it, which is a very significant difference in money. And so there's a bunch of that stuff that's kind of been. So we were like, is it going to be $1.4 million? Is it going to be 20,000 this year? But we just didn't know. And it's hard to come to the church and say, just write us a blank check for anything. We wanted to have as definite a number of answers as we could. But I do want to say this about this process, having Boyd and some of these folks that know what they're doing working on this all the way along, even though that we couldn't always get the answer, we always felt really confident the person we had that God had given us to seek the answer knew what they were doing. And so when we had ambiguity, we knew it was real ambiguity, and we couldn't decide yet. It did allow emotional time for that church to really come full circle, for them to learn to trust Mike and trust us and go through because as much as you want to say it's no brainer, it was a long emotional process for everybody. Just like it's been a couple months emotional process for us.
Back to the doctrinal thing for one more question. The CRC, the Christian Reformed Church, is another uniqueness is closed communion. Mm-hmm. Did that come up? That's the reason they split from the Reformed Church in America, which was my denomination. So it was a big deal a while ago. Was it still for them?
I don't think so, no.
We had open communion this morning.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, there goes the
There you go.
Yeah.
Calvin is turning over in his grave.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Hey, sorry if I'm out of the loop, but can you explain the decision to, instead of being a campus for our church here, that it's a separate planted church, and what are the benefits and pros and cons, and what came into that decision-making process?
Yeah. Okay. It's great. First of all, I just want to be really clear. I sort of expect you to be out of the loop if you're here. We try to put up as many documents as we can, and hopefully you got to look at some of that stuff. But I just want you to know the purpose of town halls is because we went through this process and you didn't, right? And so this is fine. Okay. Okay, I'm blanking on the question now.
Why did you decide to do a church?
Oh, right.
versus campus
Yeah,
expansion?
sorry, I drove all night last night or 2 nights ago. It's a little off. Okay, a couple reasons. One, any addition to High Point Church has to go through all of the Department of Public Education audits that our church and school have to go through because we're part of the voucher program, which is very onerous. There's lots of regulations. We think that the cost just for that is about $20,000 a year. So there's that. Now that won't last forever as a benefit because our hope is to eventually have a school over there, and then we'll still have to do all that stuff, right? The second thing is that, especially on our elder board, and we think from our elder board to the congregation as well, there's a very strong concern about debt in general. We paid off our debt. We don't want any debt. Now there's a little bit of difference of opinion on the elder board, but there's a number of elders who feel very strongly we should not take on any debt. Now this church building has some debt. Now, if they were maintained as their own entity and we plant them as a church, then all that is localized to that building. It's their debt. That campus will handle that debt. Now, we may make contributions, but it won't be to pay off our debt. It would be to support a church plant, right? And it changes the financial dynamic a little bit. And it also encourages that campus to take as much responsibility as possible for their own financial future as early as possible. Does that make sense? So there's some of that. Also, it allows them to have a constitution and polity that's more fitting to a much smaller group of people. We have a lot of checks and balances. We have hundreds of policies at High Point that have built up over the years as the church has gotten more complicated. We're now a $3 million operating organization. They're in the few hundred thousands, right? Everything will be done there by volunteers. Like it's a much simpler operation. We need some of those policies to get that work done properly, but they do not at that level of complexity. So it allows for a little bit of that there and for their polity to grow as it goes on. There's other things like leadership, who will be on the leadership boards, some of those things. There's more freedom there to make it a smaller, more nimble organization. What we don't want to do is give them all the sclerosis and difficulty and bureaucracy of a large organization when their real competitive advantage right now is being a small organization. So those are some of them. I think there's more, but those are the first ones that come to mind for me.
Oh, there.
Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, so if that is the case that we're planting, and I don't know anything about church planting, like what goes into it and what the planter gets out of it. But given that, it seems like we might be toggling a little bit about how much we tell them to change
Yeah.
their doctrines versus letting them be their own church plant under the big umbrella of Christianity.
Yeah. So, okay. How much should I say about church planting right now? Okay. Let me try to, yeah. So generally speaking, the logic over the last maybe 20 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, has been when a church closes, there's usually a reason for that. And if you're going to restart it, you don't want to situate yourself within the reason that church is closing. So you really want totally new leadership. You can include people from the old church and they can participate, but like the DNA, the mission, the leadership, that kind of stuff, you want that from the energetic, lively, whatever is doing well that you're bringing in. You want it to come from that. So generally speaking, the way this dynamic is going to work is High Points, we are going to overlay over that church. But the difference with them being a church plant is it's like our sort of like ministry DNA, our personality, so on, but without necessarily our bureaucratic structures, but with a lot of our beliefs about church polity and stuff like that. So they still get to be, we still get to like sort of invent something because it is different, but it's going to come with the things that we think have made us successful over the last 10 or 15 years. And we're going to try and inculcate those. There will be some differences, but not a ton, if that makes sense. One of the things also I think is important and also is encouraging is while we've been going through this process, one of the things they asked us to do was to have continuity of service. So we didn't close the building and empty it and then try to totally restart. They want to have services keep going. We've continued to do that. And over the last 3 weeks, Mike has told me that if for the last 3 weeks we've had attendance, there are over 70 people. This last week, today, there were 79 people there. Now, I don't know what you know about that, but it's already larger than probably 40%.
Or higher.
Or 40% or higher of the churches in Madison already.
That included 15 kids today.
Yeah. And so like there's a lot of churches in Madison that have fewer than 79 people, and they're open churches right now in Madison. So this isn't even a church plant yet. And Mike's leadership over there, we've seen about 10 people a month increasing, and we haven't even launched, done anything really other than just had continuity of service. And over the last couple months, we've had a little bit more worship. We've had Nicole and some of those volunteers have had a little bit more for worship over there, and we've opened 1 or 2 kids' rooms so parents can put their kids in something. And already we're seeing an attendance of over 70 people. So we've already almost got a church there, right? And so I think and we haven't even really started doing what we're gonna do yet. So that tells me that bringing our DNA is a good idea. And so far, the people who are there, even though there'll be some differences, they're thrilled. Because if you say, would you rather have closed communion or see children running through your hallways again screaming when you're a 78-year-old woman who's gone to church for 60 years? She will take the kids over closed communion 1,000 times over 1,000. And that's the spirit over there right now. Where they're like, we see life in our church. We're so excited. Do anything you want. Yeah. Oh, wait, Bill, we'll come back to you.
Okay, practical. How deep into the woods have you guys thought about practical things like, is there going to be an adult Sunday school class? Are you going to have youth group? How about a Wednesday night prayer meeting? Stuff that we have here. And so will High Point members still be expected to come here for those things, or are you going to have them at the building there?
Yeah, I mean, for a church this small, I mean, this might be better for you to answer, Mike, but my assumption is we're going to scale these up as appropriate. So the first things obviously is opening some children's rooms, having Sunday morning. They already have some Sunday school classes because they have like their own version of Archie McKinney over there, like a doctor who's been teaching Sunday school for 50 years and does a pretty good job. There's a little of that already, but I think Mike has probably some more things to say about scaling up.
Yeah, so we have 3 kids classes now. We have nursery. Today we had 15 kids. We have nursery, then we have a 2 through 4 and a K through 2. Grade 3 and on goes with their parents. There's about, I'd say 10 to 12 adults that very faithfully attend a Sunday school class following service. And kind of a funny story. When we started this, we told them about substance. We were talking about doctrine. And so they read it. The class went through it. And their comment was, we didn't know you were a CRC. And we said, we didn't, maybe you're just Christian. And, but they really like the book. And right now they're going through Mark Comer's Practicing the Way, which parallels Rule of Life really well. There's a prayer meeting that meets on Tuesday at 2. There's a women's group that meets on Thursdays at 10. 9. Okay. She attends.
She's there.
And we don't have youth right now because we don't have any. But as that comes on, there's one family who does have kids, but because of relationships, they bring them over here on Wednesday night. And we'll continue that probably for this rest of this school year because it's important to maintain those relationships. And who wants to go to youth group by yourself? And so, there's some practical things like that we're just aware of. And as the need presents itself and the opportunity, then we'll add in those ministries.
Yeah. For some of you that may not remember this, this is the church that we've been partnering with for more than a couple decades almost, with the Dominican Republic partnerships. And so that we've already kind of got that missions connection. Hopefully we can utilize. They also do have a really nice youth space for the size of the church that they have when we get to that point in terms of growth.
So as I understand it, this is operationally, structurally, legally a separate church, correct? It's a separate church. So is it,
Present moment, it is a definitely separate church, yes.
will they have their own elder board? Who will be overseeing?
Yeah, the plan right now is to set up a transitional board that they agree to, and then to construct their new church constitution, which will be similar to ours, but not exactly. It will have like our theological values in it, but it'll be scaled down for their level of complexity. And then that document, I'm pretty certain, will have an elder board in it. And then they'll elect their elders and they'll have elder leadership continuity as the plan. The one of the requirement from us is that transitional board will be 2/3 High Point people, which they are okay with.
Going the wrong way.
Sorry.
That's okay.
If my memory, if my memory serves me correct, their board was made up of women and men. And are they agreeable to going to a full man elder board?
My understanding is they know that we're complementarian on our elder board, and they are offering us leadership. So yes, I think that we haven't nailed down exactly what all the leadership structures, whether they'll have like a deacon board or a vestry or something like that, and whether the elder board will do all the stuff. So I think there's one lady who's on their leadership board right now. But my understanding is I've been pretty clear with them that we're a complementarian church. I want to say that doctrinally they're pretty complementarian.
So they have two elders, and then they have a council, and the council deals with the day-to-day ministries. And there are two women on that, but they have two elders, and the rest are called council. But they're fully open to function where we are, and recognizing that we're in a transition if the vote goes through, and that will take a little bit of time. And so we're just communicating and building trust, and we're very happy to move forward with this.
Sorry. Since Rick and I have been attending on occasion, can you tell me who the two elders are?
Brock and Mike Owen.
And Betty is
Yeah, and your Betty would.
Betty is powerful.
I think on one of the documents it mentions about under potential water under the slab for that. Is there any update on that?
Yeah, that's for the La Petite building, which is the school. So there's two buildings on this location, right? The main church building and the La Petite building. There have been some issues with the water under that slab. The remediation we think is relatively simple. But Mike is up here apparently with something to say.
So the water happened when we had all those torrential rains. And since those stopped, even with intermittent rains, there's been no water. That floor is being core drilled this week, just to make sure there is no pressure underneath there. And the plan that has been come up with is to approach from the outside and relieve if there is. And so the other thing I just wanted to mention, like for the roof repair, they paid for that. There's a bearing right now in one of the furnaces that needs to happen for the blower for the sanctuary. They're looking to paint for that. There was a gutter issue, they paid for that. And so they're not looking for handouts. They're being very responsible in covering their bills. And I had a kind of quasi town hall with them this morning. After service, we had a pizza time and fellowship, and then Q&A and such. And they're very, very happy. They recognize that first, they're thrilled to have a church moving forward. These people are, their biggest concern is that church stay a gospel-centered church. And they're thrilled that, and that there's kids running around. And as noisy as they were today, I said, see, you got what you asked for, be careful. And that they're being very financially responsible and recognizing that they got this condition under their watch and they want to be good stewards.
So that church is a legal entity with debt, and presumably the mortgage is theirs. Is any of that going to?
Yeah, so the plan, originally that was the idea. They become a campus of High Point Church, we would do the super worship. More recently, the elders voted for a plan to just keep them separate. So this is going to be a non-hostile takeover, right? So they're just going to give us leadership of their entity. So they'll keep their entity to be the same 501c3 as far as I know. Same, that's all that comes up. And one of the benefits of that is in terms of who holds their mortgage, the CRC holds their mortgage. And part of the dynamic here is as long as
CRC actually changed their rule so that they could keep holding the debt, so there wouldn't be any kind of refinancing or us paying a higher interest rate or anything like that. So this will allow us to just pay it off with them. It'll keep them off our books. We won't be officially assuming debt because we will become one organization, but we will be leading an organization with debt. So in that sense, we're taking responsibility for debt in terms of leadership, even though it's not coming on our books. Does that fully answer your question?
Similar to Abundant Life. I mean, we never really took any ownership of anything related to it, but we helped.
Yeah, the only difference is that Abundant Life always maintained the option of taking back control whenever they wanted to. They could simply cancel because it was a management agreement, they could just cancel it. This is a takeover where we will be in charge, and they can't just go, oh wait, no, now. We're fine, we don't need you anymore. We're actually going to be taking over. It will be a new church. Yeah, bring it a little closer.
Okay. So is there like a timeline, or like a rough timeline when we would like cease our leadership and then they would become their own church again? Or is there something catered for that staff?
Yeah. The answer is that there isn't a super definite answer for that right now. When the church is financially viable and we can call a pastor who'll be the point leader there with their elders, that would be the most obvious moment when that would be the case. I guess that's the simplest answer. I think when we can provide point pastoral leadership of an elder that has consistent teaching capacity, like a Mike, then at that point I think we would, and then we have an instantiated elder board there. That's probably what. My hope though is that over the long term we'll have some kind of relationship with this like sister church, and that there'll be ongoing. Like we may contribute for missions, we may have connections in our youth programs, things like that. I'm hoping that's going to go on. And my hope also is that maybe then when there's two churches, the two churches can help plant the third church, that kind of thing.
I'm sorry if this has been explained in some other context, but is there a reason why the CRC isn't just coming in and kind of, I guess, saving this congregation?
Yeah, because they've tried to do that 4 times. And the other major like alive CRC church in town just has too much going on. Geneva Church is like they just hired a new pastor who's a missionary to the campus, who's Evan. His name's Evan. It's not Evan. That's no Tinklenberg. Is it Evan Tinklenberg? Yeah, he's a missionary to the campus, but they're like stretching to pay for him, and they've got a newer pastor, I think, and they're stretching some stuff. They have a cool theology class for college students that they're doing. But they're just not in a place where they could plant a church. So they said no. I will say this about the CRC though. In our agreement with this church, what we told them is if we tried to replant this church and it failed, within the first, I want to say it's 3 years, but it might be 5 years. I think it's just 3 years. That the first thing we would do was give Geneva Church the first right of refusal for the building. Less our capital expenses. So if we put like $400,000 into HVAC units, and we fail after 2 years, we're just like, we can't do this. Our first offer is to Geneva, but the expectation is that they would pay us our capital expenses less depreciation. Does that make sense? So we wouldn't try to profit off the building. We don't go like, oh, now we own this $3 million building. We're just going to sell it and make $300 million, like $3 million. And that may sound really down, like really ugly, but literally Adam has a story of that happening in San Francisco. A church giving another church they're building, and that church just selling it on the open market and taking the money and using it for their ministries, rather than maintaining the building as a local church. And we've promised not to do that.
That was for 1,500.
Yeah, the Christian Reformed Church is a denomination. Yeah, it's a Reformed or Calvinist denomination. It's mostly like sort of Northern European Reformed Calvinists. And yeah, Dutch. Very Dutch. Yeah, in fact, the first time I ever walked into that church, they'd never met me before. They had no idea who I was. The first question I was asked was not, am I a Christian, but was I Dutch?
If you ain't Dutch, you ain't Dutch.
Yeah. But I am tall and blonde.
Yeah. If you're from Michigan, it's like, yeah, dyed in the wool. Quick question, in bringing up the financial, that was one aspect I think for me that I'm still kind of unclear on, because it's been a moving target. And in order to make an informed decision, at least for me, I can't really do that unless I understand the entire financial context. And in the documents that you have on your website, our website here, we've got the probability of a $2-point-something million ultimate capital campaign running over 1 to 3 years. And it's left as a one sentence without any detail. And I realize from being on the elder board that much of that pertains to this facility, some of it pertains to theirs. Can you either verbally give me a short breakdown of where that is, like who's getting what and how soon do you need it and for what? Or is there any plan to do a one-pager so that we can see that? Because otherwise, how do you make a decision without being able to count the cost?
Right, great question. So first, clarify, Mike, is that sheet that breaks down 3 campuses still accurate?
Yeah.
So there is a sheet on there that breaks it down into the High Point campus, the Monona Oaks campus, and the Crossroads campus. You guys couldn't find that?
I found great difficulty finding that.
Okay.
Okay,
We'll make sure that gets back up there because there is a page that we've revised a number of times as the numbers have changed, particularly at Crossroads. So essentially, one of the issues here that we've talked about a good bit, and you heard me say this at I think a congregational meeting at one point where I said when we vote on this may indicate we need to have a capital campaign. Here's why. As we look forward at this building, there's a number of things we would like to do with this building that we've put off for a while that are quite expensive, that are technically elective, but that really do need to be done. The biggest example of this is the carpets, right? Like, do we need to have carpets? It depends on what you mean by need, right? So, but it's a very expensive project. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars if it doesn't get closer to $1 million. And so, like, what's more important, right? Like in the next year, those are the kinds of questions we're looking at. So there are some things like the big HVAC unit back here, which we are trying to pay for as we go along. But there are some larger things that in terms of renovation in this building, right now, this building looks older than Crossroads if you go in it. Crossroads is brand new. This looks like it's been dated, right? And so there's a good bit of stuff here. So something like around 2/3 of what we would, if we did a capital campaign, what we would need is actually for this building. Okay. Sorry?
Probably 3/4.
Closer to 3/4, Mike is saying. And then there's like a medium 5-figure number, which should be to like redo some furnaces at Monona Oaks. Right? It's like they're older, they're commercial, but they're like.
How medium 5-figure? 100,000?
I'm thinking 100,000 6 figures, isn't it?
No.
50, 60, I think.
50, 60? Okay.
Yeah. And the idea here is those furnaces are real old, right? And we're critical to the operation of the building. And then at Crossroads, there's still some question marks as to when things will have to be done and how much they will cost. But the idea is that when you put that all together, and if we said, look, as a church, let's really try to do this. Partly because we want to pay as we go. There's a number of elders who are like, we believe we should have faith financially to give financially so that we pay as we go. That's what faith looks like, not taking out a big debt by faith. And Boyd has been really strong on that point. I think Steve has been really strong on that point. A number of elders feel that way. You obviously, yes. Yeah. And Nick Forrester, right? Part of the thing that some of you guys maybe don't know is that Nick Forrester and Paul were on the elder board for like 85% of this process. And then they came off like right at the end. And so Paul has walked through the vast majority of this. And so he's just like, he's missed a couple meetings, but not much. So he's been on it for the most part. And so a number of these guys have been like, to go forward like this, we should have faith and give, not have faith and take out debt. And so as the leader, I don't feel as strongly about that. I certainly don't like debt and don't want to take on debt. But if something is a leveraged advantage that I think is really important, I'm okay with taking on a little bit of debt to do that. I think that's the debt of starting a business or buying a house. I think it's activated debt. I don't think it's the same thing. But I still respect the opinions of these other brothers, and I would prefer, of course, to do that. And so given that the elders, if we defaulted to the view that we don't want to take on any debt, what would it take then to do what we should do here and there and the Monona Oaks property? And that's what that capital campaign looks like. We would have to raise that much money.
One of the things that's also important to understand is because on the campus of Crossroads, it's 9.5 acres, there's a secondary building that La Petite rents, leases, and has for a number of years. They have a current lease through the end of school year of 27. And Karis Academy has also been there the last few years. They bought a building and they're trying to get it renovated and get a sprinkler system in it. I don't know what happened at the vote the other day, but still moving forward. And so they're there probably through the end of the year. And between that and offerings and the projected offering, because there's more of us now over there than there was in April or May, bumping their budget up to a budget that should sustain a church of 125 through the end of our fiscal year, we're projecting an $85,000 overage over there. And so it's not a financial drain. The other thing that's happening is every time we look at something, it seems like it's going to be less. We still don't know about one big unit, but even that has a caveat that it may be less money. That's a big HVAC unit. The other thing is the things that we've been talking about, Crossroads has been paying. And so
What's the capital campaign number we published right now?
we published, I think it's at 1.8 is.
Where is that? Because honest opinion.
I haven't looked. I'll have to. Yeah, what is it?
It's on the Monona Oaks page. The bottom line is 195.
It's on the Monona Oaks page.
Yes. So the list of expenses with the document that Nick was talking about that breaks down all 3 campuses.
We'll adjust its location. There should be 3 pages. There should be a large spreadsheet that has timeline on it. Then there's one that just has the 3 campuses and what's there. And a couple of the items are like, we had $50,000 for top coating and striping. Well, the bid came in at 23. That also included some patching. So we put some plug numbers in there to work, thinking we were close, and all those plug numbers have come in less when we get actual bids on it, which is great.
It's really helpful.
Yeah, and so we'll get it in the right place.
It's just clear on the wrong page.
Yeah.
The sheet on the Monona Oaks page. The sheet on the Monona Oaks page is an older document, though. That is not the most current information with everything on it. We do have that. It's not on the web. So that was all that information was what we knew, reflected what we knew when we were talking about Monona Oaks in April or February or whenever that was. So we've kind of updated that, reformatted it and stuff. So we'll get that up. We'll get that up tomorrow.
Really? Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I thought that was up. I
Okay.
I didn't know it wasn't.
You dig what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Mhm. Yeah, but I think it's important to have this caveat to what Paul is saying, that if we decide to say, hey, look, we don't want to make any of these expenses other people's responsibilities. These are not our kids' responsibilities. If we're going to take these big steps forward, we have to pay for them as well. And we do what we should here to really renovate this building to get it where it should be. And we keep Monona Oaks heated and cooled like it needs to be, and we also take on this building, then what that would look like if we did it all at once, right? Over like a 3-year period, just knocked all that stuff out. Our estimate right now is that would be about 1.9 million.
And we're committing, at least, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm hearing you tell me that the general disposition of the elder board is committing to try and not do a debt situation, and to try and raise this internally without necessarily employing the use of some sort of outside contractor in order to assist getting the funds raised. Is that correct or not?
Yeah, okay. So Paul asked 2 questions. Let me make sure I state this right. One is that we're trying to do this without taking on debt officially as High Point Church, and are we going to use an outside contractor if we choose to do a capital campaign? The answer to those questions are, okay, the first one was, okay, yeah, technically, yes, we would do it without assuming any debt because it would remain another entity. But we would be taking leadership of an entity with debt. I just want to be really clear about that. High Point Church would not be assuming debt, but we would be assuming moral and leadership responsibility of an entity that does have debt. Okay? So depending on how you slice it up in your head, one way to think about it is they've already got debt. and we would be taking over leadership. They've already got debt. Maybe if we were leading over there, they wouldn't. Who knows? But High Point Church will not take debt on our books. Does that make sense? But we are morally responsible and spiritually responsible for a new organization that does have debt. Does that make sense? Now, what that means is that let's say the big HVC there can't be fixed, and we have to fix it. It's $400K. They don't have that money, obviously. There's two options there. One is that entity could finance it, right? Add to their debt. They have an $84,000 surplus. They grow and pay it off like any church would, right? And or we could decide to say, this is our church plant. We want to help for X amount of dollars, $25 to $250,000. I mean, it would really be up to us, but it would be a free love gift that we give rather than us acquiring debt. Does that make sense? So I think that would be the dynamic, is it would be an independent church plant. We have leadership, and to the extent to which they had to incur more debt, we could choose to support them, but it wouldn't be our debt as High Point Church. Oh, sorry. Okay. So the contractor thing this is the issue, because there's two reasons why elders in particular have been questioning whether we should do this. The first is this going to be too much on the staff? The second is this going to be too expensive, right? Hiring a contractor to do a capital campaign is splitting that in half. The reason you would hire a person to do the capital campaign for 60 grand is so the capital campaign, which is a year's worth of work, doesn't kill the staff, right? But what you pay that person $60,000, that doesn't go into your capital campaign, right? And so the question for us just becomes, are we more worried about the work that it will put on the staff that we think they can or can't handle? Or are we more concerned about saving that $60,000 and having it in the assets for the capital campaign? That's the question we have to make.
Having been through two of these companies doing these sorts of things, they can, in their wake, leave considerable distaste.
Yes.
And depending on the methodologies used, it can be discouraging. So this
yes,
use as tactful terms as I can possibly come up.
Yeah, I appreciate that tactfulness. What Paul said, because we don't have the recording mic, is that when you hire somebody from the outside like that, sometimes the tactics that they use and the taste they leave in people's mouths can be very negative. That is true. Nick Forster and I do not agree on everything, but the tactics of fundraising we're actually pretty close on. Like what information we're going to give people and not give people and so on, and what everybody gives, whether or not I'm going to be looking at that, and whether or not we're going to do special pushes among the wealthiest people of High Point and that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, my basic on this is like, listen, I don't care how much money you have. If you want to be a pace-setting giver, just come to the early meeting and be a pace-setting giver, whether you give $25 or $250,000. I don't care. I don't care if your income is $20,000 or $20 million. If you want to come to that pace setter meeting because you care so much about this, come. We can make more punch. Who cares, right? Like, so there's some of that stuff. So Adam and I didn't read them the riot act, but I was very direct with Adam and Mike when they interviewed one of the firms that we were considering putting forward. And I was like, okay, listen, here's what neither Nick Forster, i.e. the elders, nor I are going to go for. Because we know all the tricks, right? And we're like, these things aren't happening at High Point. You got to tell them that and ask them if they're still willing to work with us. And they did. And the guy from Generis was like, yeah, we'll do whatever you want. Like, we realize that churches feel very differently about money, and the way trust is built around money at churches varies. And yeah, I know all the tricks in the nonprofit world for raising money. And if you don't use them, I'm going to tell you you're going to raise less money. But as long as you accept that, it's fine. Actually, at High Point, though, I don't think that's true. I think that some of those tactics, if we use them, we would raise less money because people would be angry and they would feel like we weren't stewarding their trust well.
Institutional integrity often pays great dividend.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's been the thing for the last 15 years. It's like, tell people a lot, steward trust, let people give what they want, and this church has been in millions of dollars of surplus. And I'm not interested in wrecking that. Yeah.
So this may be cart before the horse a little bit, and that's okay. Part of the discussion in both taking on Monona Oaks and Crossroads has been the crowding and capacity issues at this building. It seems like that is not going to be remedied by either of these buildings, projects, partnerships. What are the thoughts around that? Because like Paul said, we're talking about a lot of money here too, but we kind of still have this looming sort of issue. I don't know. Where is that at?
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to give a depressing answer. So, okay.
So here's let me say two things about that. The first is that one, we haven't really started recruiting our East Side families to go to the Crossroads campus. I want to say there's 100 something units over there. A lot of them are younger families because that's where they can afford to buy houses. They are disproportionately, there are people who have children. However, you are right that though there is a good bit of kid space over there for that church, the likelihood it's going to be enough scale-wise to make a substantial difference here is low, because you're talking about a church that at its peak was maybe 300 people. It's rescaled to be a church of like 200 people, the way it redid its insides. And so the idea that it can pull off the extra kids from a church of 1,000 is low. That is accurate. Okay, so it'll be a little bit, but not a ton. Okay, so that's correct. So the second thing I would say is this. This won't keep us from doing something else. We think that if we lead this well and the giving grows over there, it can be pretty independent. I don't think we're going to be making huge gifts over there that will make it impossible for us to do things here. That's my hope. The financials we're looking at, the growth we've seen so far, I think that'll be okay. So I don't think we're going to pour $1 million into this building that we won't have for here, okay? The third thing, this is more depressing, okay, which is to make a real difference here at High Point, we're talking $7 million plus. It's not. It's going to be it's a very substantial project. My feeling is that if as a church, we can do what we do in global missions and we can plant another church. And right now I'm working with a church planter who's been coming to town and doing evangelism. I think we can plant another church through him at a very minimal cost to us by just supporting this guy. I think we can plant a whole nother church. And my hope is that that'll build a passionate momentum that the Lord is doing something really powerful and wants to plant churches and grow the church. And my hope is that will buoy our faith so that we could take on a project that big. So my hope as a leader is momentum-wise, doing something like Crossroads will actually help us be in a place where we have the faith to build something like that, which I don't know if we're ready for it. If I came forward and was like, hey, it's going to be $12 million. You ready? Right? First of all, we got to agree to take on debt probably. I mean, I don't know if we can raise $12 million, right? Or just pay as we go, like we build for 5 years, right? But I think that this can build our faith. That's my short answers. Not super short, sorry.
I'm not sure if this is the right place to ask, but Monona Oaks takes more money than they give us in rent. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Are they, as their church is growing, as I've heard reports, not recently, but in the past, that their church is growing, do they have a scale of giving more to us, or is it set for a year, or how does that work?
Sorry.
It's their desire.
It's their desire to pay more. Their demographic is not wealthy. So I'm not holding my breath in the very short term that we're going to see a lot more. We have talked a little bit with a few other churches about being a secondary renter in there. That none of that is really panned out. And I mean, my hope is I'd like to have space in that church for us to plant something. So that's still up in the air. If I were to tell you, oh, I think that's going to be better soon, that would not be genuine. Right now, we are subsidizing a church. It seems to be growing, but its demographic is so poor that it's very difficult to figure out how they're going to be able to pay substantially more. They're still not paying their pastor, I think, anything right now. So this is a guy working 70 or 80-hour weeks and making $0. And so it's a miracle that church is open. So, but there's ministry happening there that's really valuable. So this is the difficulty with that whole thing. Yeah, I really believe in it, but yes, it is a financial drain.
It was projected originally that that building would cost us $10,000 a month, and they're paying $3,000. The reality, I can't give an exact dollar, but it's about $3,000 less than that, and so the difference is closer to $4,000 than $7,000. I do know that he has cashed his last 3 paychecks, and they are growing, and but like Nick said. That congregation is, I'll put it this way, he keeps track of about 40 of their members by phone calls 3 to 4 times a week to make sure they're still doing okay, and some of them are eating. And so it's, I don't think I've ever met a pastor, and I've met hundreds, who loves his people as much as that guy does. And it's a mission field. and I've had the privilege of preaching over there twice, and God loves to move in that place, and it's really sweet, but it is a mission field.
Last byline I saw when I was an elder was about 75,000 a year was the estimated byline. I think that's what we were.
Yeah, and it's coming in much less than that.
Yeah, it's partly because that byline of $75,000 loss included a significant part-time employee that we're not hiring. So all of that is saved, right? Yeah, yeah.
My question is, what is do we have the staffing to fully support all these and not also detract from our ability here and your ability here to really enrich us?
Yeah, okay, so the answer is no, and hopefully soon yes, is the answer to that. So right now we're down an associate pastor, right? We're down 35 hours or 34 hours of an associate pastor. We're down a little bit in admin. And then Mike is over there, right? So right now we're kind of functioning on two pastors, and one's an executive pastor. He's not really supposed to be doing much pastoring. He's supposed to be doing mostly directing. So that leaves me, right? So there's clearly a squish there. Also, our admin staff is functioning pretty close to capacity as well, right? So part of the dynamic here is we do have administrative and oversight staff budgeted for Crossroads, because we think we're going to need some part-time help there. And we're trying to work through the associate pastor hiring process. And then beyond that, it'll be a little creative. I'm working on floating to the elders right now, hiring a part-time assistant. For me, there'll be an assistant pastor would be this church planter guy. If that works out, we'll get a little assistant pastor coverage, an assistant that can do some pastoral things. We're trying to figure out how to bridge some of these issues. But the associate pastor scored okay. We've got 3 pretty good candidates right now that are in our hopper that we think could do a good job. And we're working on some of this other assistance stuff. There's always going to be some collateral effect on the larger organization and the people in it. That's going to happen. There's been a lot of scrutiny on us, that is Mike, Adam, and I, from the very beginning on that overflow to our staff team. We've tried to keep it very minimal. We have had some key volunteers stepping up at Crossroads. Probably the biggest example of this in my mind is John Sekatowski, who he and Christina are going over there. He's preached a few times already and is planning to preach more. So we've got a person we're paying $0 to, who's a really fine preacher, who's serving that way there. So I think our goal here, and Mike has said this a number of times, because I've only served in churches of 500 or larger. I interned and youth pastored in a church of 1,000. I was an associate pastor at a church of 500 to 1,000, and now I came here. So the smallest church I've ever been a part of was this church when it was 275 people, my first Sunday, okay? So Mike has done the 30 up a number of times, and one of the things he keeps saying is, it's just not that complicated at this level. Like when you've got 70 people, maybe you pay somebody in one of the children's rooms, you pay a pastor, that's it, right? And they have the cash flow to cover some of that. So, and I think their interim pastor is finishing up their payments to him. And so that salary for him will be freed up again. So then Mike will assess what we would need to hire in the short term until that church gets to the point where it can call a pastor. So the answer is we're gearing up for that. We have some of it budgeted. Some of it's just positions we need to hire that are empty that we're working on right now.
I'm about 20 hours.
And Mike says he's over there about 20 hours. And here, 67.
Okay, sorry, it's me again. Sorry. Just so I understand it, the difference between Crossroads and Monona Oaks is Crossroads, we're looking to buy that property. I mean, that's going to be ours. Monona Oaks is we're supporting them financially, but not. Yeah. I just want to understand the difference. I'm sorry.
So part of these two here, Sherry, some of you guys may not know this. The Monona Oaks thing and the Crossroads things came up at almost exactly the same time. I mean, I think they were like a week apart. And my assumption, I remember driving home from the leadership retreat last year, calling one of these churches on the phone. And what I told the elder board is I said, listen, I'm talking with these two churches. This is kind of where we're at. Neither of these are going to work out. Okay. We'll work through 20 of these before one of these works out. Okay. I really did not think either of them would work out because they just don't usually. You get into it and then people are like, well, we don't really like you, and it just falls apart. And Monona Oaks was looking at 5 different ministries they were thinking about giving their building to. We were just one of those ministries. Charis Academy was another one. Charis had actually met in their building before and they really believed in the ministry. And so we were like, whoa.
Monona Oaks or Crossroads?
This is Monona Oaks, right? Monona Oaks was looking at 5 different ministries to give their building to because their constitution said they had to give their building away wholesale, right? Crossroads was like looking at a buyer. They knew they had to do something different. They wanted to stay an open church. Monty's school was meeting there. He connected Larry, their interim pastor, with me. We started talking. It was very nebulous, right? And Larry was like, would you like to buy the building? I was like, Larry, I cannot buy the building. I was like, I've got people, I've got passion. I don't have that kind of money, right? If you give us the building, we will make it a church, but I can't buy the building, right? And so and he had another guy who kind of wanted to buy it. And so that was kind of up in the air. I figured they'd just sell it in the end because that's what most churches do. There was a church I would have loved to take over downtown on campus. They were down to just a few people. They had a ministry to the poor. I was like, look, we will fund your ministry to the poor. You could still have your ministry. I'll put you in charge of the deacon board to do the ministry of the poor. Just do not sell this church to a hotel. And they sold it to a hotel. And it was so frustrating and a tragedy, and it was run by college ministry people that you would think would know better, but they didn't. They gave it up. They handed it over, on campus. I mean, it was literally by a hospital and by the campus. It was crazy. And so, I'm working with these people. I just didn't think it would work out. I've said from the very beginning, if we plant one of these buildings, I want Crossroads. It's a better campus, better location, better inside. We can start right away. The problem is Monona Oaks made their decision first. So we had to decide on that one months before Crossroads had even decided. Crossroads is still up in the air. They were thinking about selling their building. And so we had to make this decision about Monona Oaks first, which was the wrong order, right? So Monona Oaks gave us their building and we received it. We own that building. It had no debt, but it does have expenses. All buildings have expenses, right? But as we were thinking about what we're going to do there and we're renovating it, we wanted to share it with this other church. And then if that was the only church we got, we'd plant a church there. The problem is just a few months later, Crossroads was like, okay, we'll give you the building. And we're like, well, great. Right? So you see what this has been like, and I've been living this for a year on top of doing everything else, right? And so we were like, well, great, right? But now the people are like, well, what about Monona Oaks? It's like, well, you guys, I was juggling all 3 balls. Like I'm not a seer. I'm just working through these things as the layout of the decision tree goes. And so I believe that Monona Oaks was a good investment to have End Time Ministries in there. I think that's a good investment. But then it's so wait, we just own this building? It's yeah, basically we're stewarding a 4.5 acre, $2 million building. That's what we're doing right now. We're landlords for a vibrant ministry I really believe in that I think is doing great work in a very important place. This building then we wouldn't own, but we would take leadership of it, and the church we create, like our own child, would be the church. So it would be ours as progeny, but not ours in terms of legal ownership. Does that make sense?
Crossroads.
Crossroads. So Crossroads as a building would never belong to us, but it would become our spiritual progeny as we plant there, but it still is will be separate from us in its own thing. We own Monona Oaks right now. Does that make sense?
It does.
So it seems like it's exactly the opposite of the way it should be, but it is exactly the opposite of the way it should be.
Okay. Okay. All right. Just quick follow up to that. So sorry to monopolize here, but my passion is social justice and feeding the poor. So it just kind of broke my heart immediately when Mike said that what was going on in Monona Oaks. So what can we do? I mean, can we invest some of this time and effort into developing some programs there where it's needed?
Yeah, so, okay, this is really exciting, Sherry. Okay, so one of the ways that, everybody put on your Nick is talking in hypotheticals hat, okay? So don't turn around in a week and be like, you told us, I'm trying to make clear when I'm speculating, when I'm not. Okay, one of the things that we're looking at right now is the possibility that they could open a daycare in Monona Oaks. It's very much needed. There's been some city people that's already come to them. There was some kerfuffle over Godfrey's wife being a Democratic representative, right, and some of her views about social things like abortion, which we do, like as our elders have spoken clearly, our view is against abortion. Their church is very pro-life. She is vocally pro-abortion as a legislator, but the one thing she does have is access to social programs and ministry of the poor, right? And so she does have connections to some of the people. We think that they could start a daycare there, which could end up paying for the property, so that it's no longer a drain. And they would actually provide a really incredible service to some of the families of their churches and minority families in that area. It would be an explicitly Christian daycare where we could teach kids about Jesus. It would be like Sunday school all week long. And that's a real doable thing. So that's one possibility. They have a food pantry in there already. There's rooms just full of food there. And that's one of the ministries they already have that people access a good bit. Also, within some of the African-American churches, pastors and pastors' wives function like social workers. There's a lot of like low-key social work going on all the time. Like when we sat down, Lexi and I sat down and had like a 3-hour lunch with the Stubbs, and we were talking to them about these issues like abortion and trans stuff and like how it functioned in their church, how this ministry functioned versus her political action. How does she work that out? And those sorts of questions. When they talked about their church, right? I mean, the stories they told were standing with young women who were pregnant and walking them through having their babies and keeping their babies. It was indistinguishable from CareNet. And so they're extremely pro-life in the Christian sense of helping people embrace life relative to pregnancy. They said, Nick, in the Black church, there's still such a stigma on abortion that we just don't hear about it. People just go and have one. She's like, we would never encourage somebody to get an abortion. We've never, but their capacity to connect with people to do social programs is much more than we have. They're already doing some. But for me, the most critical thing is pastoral longevity. If Godfrey breaks, it all breaks. It's no longer a Christian ministry. It's no longer a gospel-centered ministry. It will become just some kind of social thing. It will no longer be our vision to be supporting that. And so our biggest issue is Godfrey and Sheila's marriage, their well-being, Aquila's well-being. Aquila has suffered from a conversion disorder where she couldn't walk. And it's probably connected to stresses that came through COVID and things like that. So like, we've been trying to care for that family. And through that, he cares for this church. And then they can have a vision for these broader programs, which could be supported, but they're very gospel-centered in how they do that. So we think that there's a development there that's really good. There's another Latino church we've partnered with that's working on a larger social program thing. I think it's a little bit stalled right now. So we're a little bit touching these on the side, but we're mainly trying, as long as their vision, even for like social programs, is Christian-centered, it includes discipleship for the kids people we care for. We're like at like the second step back of being supportive. Does that make sense? We feel like if we can support that church and that pastoral couple, then they can do a bunch of ministry. Does that make sense? And that ministry, and Mike, I know you want to say something. Mike's ministry to these families in our city has been very, very exemplary. I won't share a lot of it because I can't air private stuff about people's business in a context, obviously. But Mike's walking with all these different pastoral families who have so much weight on them, so many financial cares, like issues with their buildings, issues with the city, having to do everything for the people in their congregations, having non-functioning elder boards, trying to find good help in their church, but finding that they have to do everything themselves. The stress, the medical problems that come from that stress. We've had a pastor that we work with hospitalized just in the last 2 weeks for stress-related, just physical implosion. He's ended up in the hospital because of the stress that's on him. And a lot of these immigrant minority pastors are under unbelievable stress. And Mike has just been like calling and meeting and having lunch and working with, and this church has been giving gifts as strategically as we can to try to give encouragement to these folks.
One of the things that happens, there's not a minority church in town that trusts you because you're white. And a lot of this has been, Pastor and I, we've had Marcio, who's probably the most generous in every category. Yeah, he's over at Lighthouse. He sat me down about 3 years ago and he goes, listen, Beresford, we don't trust you. You're white. And then went on to tell me what I needed to do, what Nick needed to do to be acceptable. And when we go into those churches now, there's probably 3 or 4 churches where both of us, if we walk in, we're called pastor. And it has taken time to build that trust. And where we're at with End Time now is we are trusted. And so if you want to find out what's going on, let's go talk to Godfrey, because he has more plans than we can shake a stick at. And he has such a heart for his people, and he knows these people and what they're getting and what they're not getting in the various programs. And I mean, he'll be able just to specifically say, okay, this person, this person, this person. And at the same time, he's not a pushover. We were talking one day about a doctrinal issue that he's trying to cover. And there was a guy laying over on the couch. And I said, what's with him? He said, he's been out of prison for 8 months. I visited him every week for 8 years. And within a week, back on heroin, back in trouble. He's going back to prison shortly. And today's his last day. I said, of what? Of making sure that he gets a meal. I'm not responsible for him anymore. I told him they would come today. And I was glad to see that, not because the guy needed that. He did need that. But, he was destitute at 1 o'clock that afternoon. But at the same time, so many people like that just hang on and use people. And Godfrey was like, I told him I would do it for a season, and that season's over. And now he's begging me, but no. And so Godfrey functions incredibly well as a loving shepherd, but also as a wise one. And so, yes, we're at a point where we are trusted. And if any of you walked in and identified yourself as part of the High Point family, you'll simply get a hug, because we do have that level of trust now. And some of them are shaking your heads because you've been over there. And Godfrey needs the help. So anything you want to do, give me a call. Let's go do it.
Let me say one last thing about this. Harold Rayford was a pastor in Sun Prairie's, African-American guy. He was there for about 10 years, right? And I asked Harold one time, particularly when he was leaving, I was like, who is a trustworthy African-American brother that if I partnered with, like, I can trust him and he can trust me, right? And he said, he said, Godfrey Stubbs. And I said, okay. And then a little while later, I said, what would really most help Godfrey? Like, do you know what would really most help him? And he said, yeah. He said, a place where they could have worship continuously. He said, because they move every 2 years. African-American churches, because we can't buy our building, we end up renting places, we get kicked out, we get moved from place to place to place, and you can't ever get any momentum. Black churches that have their own building and pay for it, they often have continuity as long as they have leadership health. Godfrey's churches always had leadership health, but it's never been able to stay anywhere. It's gone from hotel to blah, 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 to call center, to everything. They got that building bought out from under them. They were homeless. And he said, if you can help them stay in a place, Godfrey can reach more people. Mm-hmm. And so for them, in fact, I went to his pastoral meeting before Lexi and I went out to lunch with them. So I went to their church, went to their pastoral meeting for 2 hours before we went out to lunch to talk about the political stuff. And he referred to them saying, we've never played at this level before as a church. And what he meant was, we have a building to steward. And he's like, listen, look, High Point Church is counting on us to not waste this opportunity. Like they're like, I know you think those white people have endless money. They don't. Right. And I've said that over there. I was like, look, we're going to be as generous as we can. We do not have endless money. Like this is teamwork. Okay. We can't. Right. And he's like, we have this moment where we could do something as a church. Let's do something, and I'm just in tears. Right. And so my belief is the biggest investment we can make in the Black church in Madison right at this moment is giving this key church continuity of space and see what happens. I think we'll know a lot in 2 years about what's going to happen there. Yeah. So I know Monona Oaks is a drain financially. And I know on some level there's kind of like, we've got this other thing. Man, listen, we're talking about 5 figures and we're talking about like, who knows what God will do. And look, I know that there's some concern about Sheila's politics. I understand that. The pastor's wife in Black churches often means head deaconess. It's not doctrinal teacher. It isn't that. And Godfrey was the chair of the Republican. He was the chaplain for the Republican Party. They're completely divided politically. That's not what drives their church. But he is very biblical. Like he's 100%. I believe in the Bible. He does biblical exposition. He calls people to obedience. The last time I was there, he was talking about gossip and stuff out of Matthew 6, and he was preaching the paint off the wall, exactly what Jesus was saying. And I really think that gospel proclamation in that place with some continuity, something really cool could happen. And I want to see, so much of this is just like, you just don't know what's going to work. And we should fail at some things. If we're trying stuff, some stuff will fail. And that's just how it is. We're supposed to be entrepreneurs, not just good professionals, right? And I feel like this is an investment really worth doing, at least for a couple of years, to see what happens. And then see, right, from there.
So real quick, we haven't, Nick and Mike have talked, you guys haven't heard anything from an elder. So I happen to be an elder, so I'm going to share something really quick, and I'll try to be quick, Adam. But when Nick was talking, I'm hearing the different things. God just kind of dropped a thought into my head, and he said when Nick was talking about, well, I'm not a soothsayer, I can't know what this was all planned was going to happen. This church was going to come available. This church was going to come available. All that stuff, but God dropped this thought in my mind but I knew this was going to happen. So both Nick and Mike have talked for about the last 5 or 10 minutes about all the blessings and the things that are happening at Monona Oaks and all the things that are so wonderful, that are so great. Yeah, that's a little bit of a drain on finances, but we do that when we give money to missions. We don't ask for missions. We don't ask them give us a report on missions and say, what did you do with the money that we gave you? Well, sometimes we do, but we do our best, yeah. But right, but
there is a certain amount of things.
Yeah, but the thing is had we gotten Crossroads first, speaking as an elder and knowing what I know about that, and all of us saw it, there's a strong possibility that us as men of God would have said, Crossroads is a much better deal. It's a lot more, looks a lot nicer. It's really good. Why don't we just let the Monona Oaks be, and it'd be a really nice fire station for Monona. We could have made that decision. However, God had a different plan. He didn't let that happen. He forced us to listen to him and say, guys, you need to make a decision on this. You need to bring this to the congregation now. This is the action plan for this. There was no congregation at Monona Oaks. It was a building. At Crossroads, it's completely different. There's a building there, but there's a church. There's a church that is vibrant, that just wants people to come in. And as you've heard many times, I want to see kids running in there. And actually, Mike, this morning, one of the kids was scraping the chair across the whole thing and couldn't even hear him talking. And he said, I need a parent to take care of this. So, but I guess what I want to point out is we tried to listen to God. But God forced us to make a decision to do it in his order, not in our order. If we would have done it in our order, we might not be in Monona Oaks. We might not have these testimonies that we're talking about. And that's important, that we have God that is leading us through this all the way. So I hope that helps from an elder standpoint. Next question.
All right. Okay. I have a question about the people from High Point. If they move over to Crossroads, do they stay members of High Point? Do they transfer their membership over there? Like, how do we have any sort of guidance or guidelines, or do we have any thoughts about how that's going to happen yet?
Yeah, my assumption is that when Crossroads has a category for membership in its new entity structure, that those people will make a choice. That's my assumption. They'll always be welcome here, though, Rebecca.
So if we vote yes, there will be a $2.2 million capital campaign, right? Oh, according to the document that I have.
No, and what was the wording you said, Kristen? There will be. Okay, the answer to that is no, but it's reasonably likely. Okay. So,
and less likely if we don't take on Crossroads. I'm just wondering, with all the expenses, okay,
No, if we do a capital campaign, it'll probably happen with or without Crossroads, I would think.
so what I'm wondering is, how does our capital reserve fund play into that? And all the money that we had been paying towards our mortgage, like what's going on with that? I thought we were shoring up the capital reserve fund to pay for the expenses like carpets, reupholstering the pews. Is it just not enough, or like why do we still need a capital campaign?
Yeah. The answer is that the projections that were made some years ago have not been sufficient for inflation, things people didn't count on, a few things depreciating faster than we thought, and some things like that. I thought that we were. So last year when we took on Monona Oaks, at that same time, the elders voted to increase our capital reserve line by $40,000 because it seemed like that was the adjustment we needed to make given the expenses that we were seeing. So we've been expanding that as fast as we thought it was like actuarially necessary. Every time finance has said, hey, we think we need to grow this, I think we have grown it relative to all recommendations. So just as a senior pastor, I can't do that accounting. I think facilities and finance have tried to do a really good job of projecting, and we've always funded that projection in our budgets. So here we are.
I looked on the website, I couldn't find how much is in the capital reserve fund?
Is in it right now? I don't know the answer to that, but it's all spoken for because we're doing this $450,000 unit.
And Nick, I think we forgot there was an unexpected HVAC issue here that absorbed all of our capital reserve. But
yeah, no, that's what I'm talking about. I'm saying whatever's in the reserve is spoken for because of the big project we have to do on the large HVAC.
It is in the congregation. Every congregational meeting, the minutes will have the reserve amounts that are spoken of by the finance, and that financial report is in those as well. So if you reach out to Katrina. Because we don't make that widely open to the public, we make that open to the membership. So Katrina can get you the link to all those documents probably before you go to bed tonight.
And Kristen, that number fluctuates a lot because facilities is always paying for something. And so we have a budgeted amount. Last I knew, and so don't quote me on this exactly, it was $120K, and then we increased it by 40 last year. And that just every year that just goes into that amount. But like, dude, I don't know how many year old building was originally built in 91, the main section, right? And so we have a lot of upkeep. And so Boyd does a really, really good job. Facilities does a really good job with trying to use money well, but we're always paying for stuff. So that number is always kind of like this. The biggest issue was there's a huge HVAC unit like over the gym, and that's like $450,000 just for this thing because it's in a building it's in a room we can't get out of. It's a mess of a project because of how this building was built. It's not Boyd's fault. And so to get that, and so that it had to be done, has to be done all at once. It's a huge project. I think it involves a crane and stuff. And it's just really expensive. It was not expected. I was very surprised by it when it came up. And so it's going to make a big difference in how much we have on hand. Yeah. Because just a couple of years ago, we were looking at our capital reserves in the carpet project and we're like, hey, but this could work. And when this thing dropped, it made it. So here's the thing. We could decide not to have a capital campaign, increase our budget that we budget to capital reserves. We could do that. Spin this church off on its own, make them pay their own bills, and just kind of work it out over 7 to 10 years. We could do that. Especially if we keep growing it all as a church. If we don't want to do that, if people in our church are like, look, we want to renovate the place. We want everything to look nice. We want to do the carpets soon. Well, then the answer to that is, well, we can. We just have to buy them. And in order to buy them in the short term, we don't have that money available in liquidity right now. We would have to do a capital campaign if we didn't want debt. And the elders are pretty strong on not wanting debt. So the question is, do we want to do it over the next 3 years? Is it that big a priority? And is it a big priority not to have debt? If both of those things are true, that triggers a capital campaign. If we say, well, we'll just wait. Let's just increase the capital reserves. Then we don't have to have a capital campaign. It just won't be nice for a while. Or we can say, we want to take on debt. Well, then, of course, with debt, you can do anything you want. You just have a lot of debt, right? So there's 3 ways to do it, but given we want to do it relatively soon and we don't want to have debt, that would trigger the campaign.
Further
answer to your question. The capital expenditures amount currently is right around $200,000. It's projected to be at the end of the fiscal year about $70,000 after we pay for the HVAC unit, roughly. Those are rough figures; they're not exact. We always, as a Buildings and Grounds Committee, are having to make decisions about where to spend the money. It's not that there are not enough places to spend it. There are way too many places to spend it. And so in this instance, it came, do we want to have beautiful new carpet or do we want heat in the building? I could let you make that choice, but I think your choice would be the same as mine, and the same as the committee's, that heating and air conditioning are more important to us than new carpet currently. So if you have any questions or suggestions about how we do some of these things, I'm always open to hear those suggestions.
Join the committee.
Yeah, you can join the committee too. We can always use more people.
Sure.
I go.
Yeah, Mike was saying that as far as he knows, if you go and look at the sheet that enumerates the costs of things that we would do a capital campaign for, if you look closely at it, almost none of those things are necessities. In fact, I think the most current version that we'll get up there has like A, B, and C in terms of priority, and most of everything is B and C. And the main thing that was an A was this HVAC that we're already in the process of paying for. So what we were looking at was like, what are our priorities at High Point in terms of renovation? Like things like the carpet, obviously we've used that example. And that stuff, like this, we could have this carpet for a lot longer, right? Like I'm an immigrant son. I'm good for 20 more years with this carpet personally. But you know, there are renovations you need to do, right? So those things, so when we say capital campaigns, like, listen, if we don't raise $1.7 million or whatever, or, you know, this place is going to close. It's nothing like that. It's, if we want this place to look as nice as Crossroads, then we've got to do some renovation here. And if we're going to do that on this time scale, then we would have to raise the money. Does that make sense? I don't want you to think that like we've just mismanaged things and the place is going to close and we have mold, or it's nothing like that. It's just, how nice do you want to make it? How soon? And do you think that that's a hospitable priority relative to the people we're trying to reach? Go ahead, but like at some point, who's the elder taking the mic? Can you take it to Aaron's wife, whose name I've forgotten right now, because she's been trying to say something for a while. Go ahead.
Thanks, Nick. Jessica Marie is my name. That's okay. So I'm just seconding Dave's point about Crossroads, because when Monona Oaks came up and I was at the open house, I had been praying for months to have a church on the east side that was as loving and welcoming as High Point. And then I kind of gave up when Monona Oaks was like, oh, it's not going to be a second High Point. And then Mike emailed Aaron August 12th that we should check out Crossroads. And ever since then, I've been completely sold. These 20 grandparents for my kids are just so excited that we're in the building and interrupting Mike's talks. And it just it wouldn't have happened at a different time. But I'm just blown away.
Since you were going to back me up, I should have gave you the mic a long time ago.
Apparently Dave is not a prophet either. Yeah.
Have you accounted for the fact that if a number of families from High Point go over to Crossroads and identify with that and start giving, then High Point is losing that money?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah. We will. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of shells sliding around, and here's what I'll say. And some people will hate this. Okay. One of the things that's good about Mike and I, and probably also Adam to a certain extent, is the same thing that's also bad about Mike and I, and Adam to a certain extent, is we're very flexible. We can just change out on a dime, and we're willing to move the dominoes. So for us, especially Mike and I think Adam likes to be a little bit more, but like, I'm like, look, you know, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Or Napoleon said, every battle, you have a battle plan until the first cannon is fired. And then you had better be improvisational or you can't get through a complicated process. So yes, these are all significant considerations. And it's true that if 100 people went over there, that could really affect us financially. But for me, that's such a positive kingdom reality that we would just have to make the adjustments here that we would have to make.
It's just a biblical truth that every time there's a faith requirement, there's suffering that accompanies it.
Yeah, we're willing for, like, if we do this by faith, we don't think if we do this by faith that God will make it not hard. My assumption is God's going to make it hard. He's just going to make it possible. And all I can say is if there's any kind of suffering at High Point, I'll make sure Mike suffers first. And then me. Right? So, yeah.
I have the privilege of sitting on the finance committee, and many of these things that you've brought up, we have been wrestling with for months and clarified, and we came to the conclusion last month that if God wants this, he will push it through. And we can pick this and that all apart all we want. But if God wants this, everything will work out. And we have to march forward with that faith. And we've gone over capital expenses at all three facilities. And, you're always welcome to come to the committee meetings and sit and go through it for a couple hours with us. And Brandon does a fantastic job of keeping track of all of this.
Yeah. Some of you guys have heard me say this about High Point Church, that High Point Church has been faithful to give millions of dollars, but our real wealth, right? It's kind of like like the real wealth of Moria was in Mithril, right? It was like the real wealth of High Point Church is the human capital. There are doctors and CEOs and finance professors and people and HVAC experts and Bible teachers and realtors who are very, very good at these different tasks in this room right now. Very few churches have the human capital. And economists tell us that 80% of the wealth anybody has is in their social capital, who they're connected to, and their human capital, what they're capable of. Our wealth as High Point Church is all the things you have all learned to do at high levels. And when we come together on finance teams and facilities teams and pastoral teams and children's teams, and we all use these capacities that we have $1 billion in wealth. Okay, we can give our tens of thousands and our millions of dollars out of what we can in our tithe. And that may seem like not enough, but do not underestimate what is within you. Your upbringing and your schooling and your experiences and the skills that you've mastered and your vocations and your avocations, and giving those as sacrificial gifts, which people at High Point do every day. It's not every day that you have one of the comptrollers for the entire retirement system, a finance professor, and an accountant and so on looking over our finances and helping us solve those problems. People who have built houses and been HVAC repair people for their entire lives looking over our facilities. Does that make sense? And a doctor who led our last healthcare crisis problem for how we were going to do health insurance. These are High Point Church's wealth is in Mithril. It's in our human capital. We have an unbelievable amount. And that's why I'm saying we have to unleash it, not just our financial capital and not even just our spiritual capacity, but all of the abilities that God has given us. If we sacrifice our time and our effort to bring the things we are good at to bear together in unity, it's unbelievable what we could accomplish. And if we can do that in unity with other churches and the different human capital that they have, places like End Times, things that will happen that have not happened in generations. I've already been told by churches in the city that things are happening through the unity of us with other churches and through the gifts of our people in our church that they have never seen in their lifetime in Madison. And I think we could be just starting, because as trust builds, I think momentum can build, right? And so I just want to affirm our finance team, our grounds team, our personnel team, these are committees of people who we don't pay a dime, and they bring millions of dollars of expertise to bear every week and every month as they meet. And that's one of the things that makes us capable of doing things we otherwise would be totally incapable of doing. And that's one of the reasons I believe in this church so much. And that's why I'm so confident that even as we make holes, I know that hospitably and in terms of caring, we will invite in more people. And I think God will give us more people. And one of the things Mike has said a number of times is oftentimes when you step out and you see those families go, right, it also creates energy in the church and faith that brings in more people. And that's something we can't count on. That's something you hope for, that you do by faith. But also, it kind of lights a fire under your butt, right? Like the people who are going to go over to Crossroads are like, look, nobody's coming to save us. Like it's the 70 of us who have to make this church go. And that creates a family and like a unit of people that do something passionately. And when we lose people for a good reason, right? It's like, okay, we got to get our butts in gear. Like we didn't just fail. We just did something great, but now we just lost some asset, right? Like some people that we counted on. Like we got to really reach out to these new people who visit. We got to really reach out and like focus on growing ourselves. And so my hope is that, you know, by having these things happen, it'll light a fire under us in a way. And I don't think we've been dead as a church. One of the things I said at the Elder Board is I believe for the last 15 years, our legacy at High Point Church has been, we've been really faithful. And what I think God is calling us into now is a new season of faith in addition to faithfulness. I think we've been really good stewards. I think we have to learn to be ready now to risk, right? We've managed carefully and safely really well. And now there's the entrepreneurial question. Can we be more than professionals? Can we be starters? Can we be entrepreneurs? Can we take that in faith? And I think this, and for me, I think some of you heard me say this, I feel like Crossroads is so in your face, it's almost embarrassing. It's like, here's a multi-million-dollar building. It's already been renovated. 40,000 cars pass it a day. There's already a congregation. The building has income. Do you think you could plant a church? Right? And I'm like, we probably should. Yeah.
One of the things that Adam asked me to talk about at the leadership retreat last weekend was the kingdom of God. And I've had several conversations with people in the church. What we can't forget is that the kingdom of God is greater than the church. The church is a part of the kingdom. Our investments into these other churches, whether it's Monona Oaks, Crossroads, Pedro's Church, Lighthouse, we're investing into our family, our brothers and sisters. We're investing into the kingdom of God. And the promise that Jesus made to Peter was that he would build his church. This isn't ours. He will build his church. And the more that we step into that conviction and truth, the more we untie God's hands to bless and to do what he wants to do in Madison, in building the kingdom of God. And I told somebody this morning, that piece of property at Crossroads probably is the finest piece of property for a church in Dane County. Its location. It's just location, location, location. And I was just standing in the parking lot this morning watching the cars go by on a Sunday morning. It was amazing. If you're on a weekday, it's crazy. Just what's going on in McFarland and South and the cars moving past there. And we have an opportunity to retain a ministry, but more than that, continue to sow into the kingdom of God. And if you look at the synoptic gospels, the different occurrences, Jesus talked about the kingdom of God 51 times. He talked about the church twice. And all the times he talked about the kingdom of God, he included the church. But it's a much bigger picture from upstairs. We're a piece of it. But we're part of the piece that he will build as we invest into his kingdom.
Is there other more questions? Yeah. Okay, so just really quick. Some years ago, we supported a missionary in the Philippines named Vince Burke. And a few years ago, he was here giving a sermon. And he said something that kind of stopped me cold and I've never forgotten. And he said, because I've never been a good mystic, like hearing from God, okay? The way I refer to following God is I read the providences. I try to look and see what's happening and try to follow what the lead seems to be. But it's not a mystical experience for me. And he said this one thing. He said, listen, you don't know God's plan. That's God's secret will. You don't know God's plan. Okay. Therefore, the only way you can efficiently and effectively participate in God's plan is if you do the things he told you to do. The most prophetic thing you can do is obey the Lord. Because if you do your standing orders and he works his secret plan, he will work it all in perfect unity. But if you try to do something on whatever you want to do, and then he's doing what he wants to do, even if you think what you're doing is spiritual, it's not going to work. You're the most forward-thinking, prophetic you can possibly be is to just do the things Jesus told you to do Obey him, love him, serve people, do what's in front of you to do. And so that's always been my attitude about this. Is like, what would be obedience here? What would be faith and obedience given my standing orders, reading the providences in front of me, so that God is working out the crazy stuff, but I'm in position to be part of it by just obeying what he told me to do. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, hey Nick. Earlier you discussing kind of the vision and the goal for a new constitution for the Crossroads congregation. Just trying to understand like more of like a vision and a goal for like what the timeline would be for that. Would that be something, you know, we see next year or years down the road from now? Like what's your idea and the church leadership here idea on when that would occur?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general hope on a church plant is 3 years to financial sustainability and independence. That's your general hope, okay? Now, we haven't even started yet, and we have 70 people. Okay, so that's weird, right? Usually that would be post-launch. If you got a launch of like 170, that's going to dwindle to 70 as like your core over 3 or 4 months, and then you're going to move forward from that. And we're already there, and we already have a building. So, I mean, by assumption, it's less than 2 years. Yeah, to a constitution and a constitutionally elected leadership board.
This table's starting to get all the questions coming here. With all my involvement with mission trips with Crossroads people and all the meetings and whatnot and hanging out with some of those people, I heard about something, but I haven't heard about it here, that there's a separate foundation that is not a part of the church, but it is part of the church. Maybe some of the same board members and whatnot. And so my big question is, don't know how much money's in that and how it can potentially be used for.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, there was a death, and there was money to inherit, but there was nobody to inherit the money to. And so they gave it to the church. And the original intent of the foundation was to pay for kids to go to camp. If, you know, various things that were ministry things, they paid for the new sign out in front of Crossroads Church. They did project work. I don't know the amount of that. It has a separate board. It's not part of High Point or of Crossroads, but I have been told that it exists and there is some money in it, and they want to participate back into what's happening. And so part of the thing that's been frustrating is what it is that we haven't voted yet. And so there's a lot of things. I got a whole list of things to do on November 18th. Maybe. You know, and that's one of them. It's on the list. And but I do know that out of that foundation, some of the monies got paid to, like the $10,000 for the roof. The foundation board determined to pay that, and so they covered that bill. And so I don't know what the number is. I don't think it's a huge number, but I know it's a number. And on maybe November 20th, I can tell you. I don't know.
Quick question is, how much mortgage is still left in? I think it was around June. The document said around 292,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 290.
290, and the monthly payment is 2105.
290, and the monthly payment is 2105.
Which they pay on a monthly out of their ministry funds.
Which is all paid for at Crossroads. And that payment was figured in to the expected $85,000 surplus at that campus. So the surplus is in addition to them making that payment on a monthly basis.
How many years on the board?
That's exactly what I was going to ask, is how many years left is that?
14.6. I don't know.
I don't know.
When the elders talked about this, the discussion was, can we pay that off in 6 months? So I was not looking at the amortization. Because they were like, if it's going to be our debt, we're knocking that stuff out. We're not having Boyd was like, I'll vote for this as long as we have the debt less than 3 months. So I wasn't looking at whether it was 12 or 14 years.
In the interim between our takeover of Crossroads and them having their own constitution,
what is the governance? I think I'm still a little unclear. Who's going to have the spiritual authority? Like, is our board of elders going to have?
Yes. So, okay, the plan has been, and it was in flux. We just voted on a new one. So, elders, correct me if you think I have misunderstood this. We'll have a interim board. The interim board will be 2/3 High Point identified people, 1/3 Crossroads identified people. They will govern as they've been governing. We'll prepare it, and if there is a needed backstop to that board, it would be our elder board. Okay. But they will govern that church. Then we'll produce a constitution and bylaws for that church. Simple enough relative to their level of complexity. It will have our theological DNA, our confession of faith, mostly our polity. It might be not as complex as ours, but it'll be the same basis as ours: congregationalism, elder-led, complementarian. And then then that'll get ratified, and then that'll govern.
In the interim, what I've told them is that that transitional board, which is how I've termed it, will take care of the dailies and the immediate ministry plans. Anything beyond that, if it were church discipline, if it were doctrine issue, if it were that level of things, it would come to our elders until such a time that they're set up where they have their elders.
Yeah, the shortest way to say that pastorally is our elders will be the pastoral authority until we have an elder board to hand pastoral authority off to. And you can come up here if you want to say something.
So I might have missed it, but do we know the wording, exactly what we're going to vote on in 2 weeks? Like, is it, I know it's to take spiritual oversight, but is it also adjusting our budget? Have we figured out the details yet or not?
Yeah, my understanding is, and Steve, are you looking this up right now? Okay, great. I think Steve's looking up the motion right now. My understanding is that it just doesn't require an adjustment to our budget at this point. So it would just be to take spiritual leadership of this church, because we wouldn't come into ownership of the church building. We wouldn't acquire its debt, right? And we don't have any necessary immediate staffing. And some of that staffing could be paid for at that campus if we wanted staffing. So there isn't a change to our budget, which means technically, right, we don't even have to have a congregational vote according to our bylaws. If the elders just decide to do this, we could just do it. We're planning a church. That's a new ministry thing that we're doing. The reason we're doing it is because we said we were going to, because we thought we were going to take the property on and the debt. We don't want that to be an issue. Plus, it's something we want to do as a whole church. So having the whole church vote for this on as our direction is, we think, a moral and spiritual indication of what we should do together, as opposed to something literally required by our bylaws. Part of the process of our elders leading building trust is not getting away with what we can. Like, we're not the federal government, right? Like, the idea is we want to build trust with you, right? Anybody can leave whenever they want. This is an organization built on trust, right? So even though I think, given what we're going to do technically, I could just say as a senior pastor, the other boards could say, this is what we're going to do as a part of our ministry, because it doesn't fall under any of those necessary voting items. We had planned on it, so we didn't want to say, well, we're doing it different, and now because somebody would say, well, you changed how you were going to do it so you wouldn't have to ask us, right? Which would be totally false, but you could see how people would think that. So part of it is just to not do it in a way that seems suspect, and also do it in a way that hopefully will build camaraderie together.
Do they have their own missionaries?
They have a few. Most of the things that they support are organizations. Right. And so they support like the Gideons and some things like that. So our agreement with them is that we have them select a few missionaries, and we agreed to support those for 3 years or 4 years, Mike? For 4 years. It amounts to about $120,000 total over 4 years. All that money we think is going to come from the Crossroads campus itself. So basically, La Petite is going to pay for their missionaries. If that makes sense, right? So that money won't come from High Point. It'll come from that campus. And Mike has already begun. And when I first negotiated this with Larry to get in the ballpark, he said, hey, this is the campus cash flow. Do you think some of that could be sent towards our missionaries? right? Because our cash flow over 3 years would be this. Could some of that go through our missionaries? Now that was before we knew about the mechanicals. And I was like, look, I don't have any problem with that. Like we care about all missionaries, not just our missionaries. And so, yeah, I mean, like we don't want to make a forever commitment, but I'm open to that. Let's talk about it. Once we knew the mechanicals and it could be the hundreds of thousands of dollars, Larry was like, okay, I understand that changes things. So we figured on 4 groups that we'll support. One of them, the main one that we're going to give the most to is Evan Tinglenberg, the guy ministering on the UW campus, who we would all be for as a college missionary. And so that's really good. One of them is Bethel Adoption Agencies. High Point's pretty high on adoption. There are a couple things about Bethel that are a little not fantastic, but that's the organization that the Darbones used for how many kids? For their first child. And so there's some personal connection there. And there's a guy in the Ukraine that they give a very small amount of money to. And CareNet is one of them that we give to. So we were like, oh yeah, more money to CareNet. That's great. So that's kind of the dynamics. And then after 4 years, we'll reassess. And look at that stuff. I'm actually pretty open to continuing to support Evan as long as he's doing the ministry that it looks like he's doing. He's doing some cool stuff on campus. We'll just have to see when we get there.
I do hear that they're going to have a missionary that's going to come and speak on a regular basis at Crossroads.
Yeah, I think there's a missionary that's going to be one of their preachers over there, right?
Maybe you could get together with him and talk through that.
What I expect to happen, though, is as this becomes an independent church, the joke here is that Bob lives close over there, and he's going to be doing a little bit of preaching at Crossroads, it looks like. The short answer, though, for you is they do have some missionaries. The idea, though, is when they become their own church, they will be a missions church like us. We will set them up like us. And so they will be a missions church. They will have missionaries. They may retain 1 or 2 of the ones that they have now, but they'll end up with additional ones. And maybe some of ours. Maybe they'll support them, too. We'll see.
Yeah, I heard a little back there, sitting back there, there's a little confusion around like, what did the elders vote on and what are we voting on and whatnot. So I'm going to give you the illustration that Nick gave at the elder board meeting before we voted. So, well, before we voted, I didn't vote. I'm not an elder. They voted, but I was in the room. So the way to think about this is like, there's 100 ways to skin a cat. Nick's a redneck. You guys all know this, right? So there's 100 ways to skin a cat. We've looked at enough of the details to know that we could probably skin this cat 3 or 4 different ways at least. We haven't necessarily decided exactly which method we're going to use to skin this cat. But we're deciding we're going to skin the cat because we're pretty confident we could do it in a number of different ways. There are subsequent decisions, some of which have been made in subsequent elder meetings. Some have yet still to be made about exactly what methodology we want to use. And some of that is intentional because we want to be able to be flexible with this as we get into the nitty gritty. With like with a church plant like this, you have to have flexibility for a church plant to go. The church plants is always change. That's the nature of them. They're an entrepreneurial thing, right? It's like a small business. You can't have the rigidity of a larger organization. It will hamper the whole thing. So that's like, if there's a little bit of confusion about like what's exactly being decided on, it's, are we doing this? Do we think we can do this one way or the other? There are some details in terms of what we think we'll do, how we'll do it. Those are not all worked out, and that is on purpose. Do you want to add anything to your?
Yeah, and I did say the cat stuff, and the main idea is like so what we try to do is give you enough information, you know all the implications. We could have to raise money, right? We could have to do this. Some people could end up going there who are your friends. Mike is spending some time over there. He'd have to spend more time over there. We're trying to make sure you know the implications, but the question is, shall we do this together? Right? This is a goal. And planting a church is such a big thing and such a big part of a step for a church. It's like a couple having their first child. And it's a big thing, and you want to be in one accord when you do it. And so the issue is not that our bylaws require this. Our bylaws do not require this vote. But our life together, our unity, our solidarity, our hopes, and our joy in doing it together will be fostered by this vote. Does that make sense? If we choose to. And if we decide not to do it, we're like, no, we can't do this. We got to focus on here or something else. Then we decide that together too, right? Because doing it or not doing it, we're going to do it together. Does that make sense? And that's the purpose. Now, I think we'll probably say yes, but I want to make sure that we know what we're doing. And I think this is a big enough thing that we should step into it together or step away from it together.
Kind of 2 different scenarios. Let's say that something like La Petite doesn't work out. They decide to something happens with that, and so kind of the unhappy scenario. What happens then? Are there, at what point does High Point sort of step in and directly intervene in that, or how does that play out financially? And then let's say that things went the happy path and things went overall well. Do we expect that they're if things we've mentioned that they are currently paying for everything? Would we anticipate any form of end of year offering or whatever going to them in the happy path?
Yeah. Okay. So right now we are in management of Crossroads right now. The way we have worked this out because of the overlap issue is we basically said we will continue doing worship and we will lead. And if our church votes against it, we will give some continuity of leadership until you figure out what you want to do. Because what I told the elders, and they completely agreed to this, is I said, listen, if the church votes against this, we're still morally obligated, because we're in this process with these folks, to help them get on to the next thing, even if we don't take the church. So we've been managing them for some time. So these decisions, Mike Owens, who's one of their head guys, is talking them over with Mike, and they're making these decisions right now. So if that's something like that happened with La Petite, this would be a Mike Owens, Mike Beresford, figure it out kind of decision right now, right? Positively speaking, relative to year-end gift, when I floated capital campaign and fundraising to the elders, and there was like, do we really need to use an outside group? One of the things I said is like, one way to do this capital campaign is just do 3 big year-end pushes and say, okay, for the next 3 years, our year-end gifts, we're going to do all that we can, and we're going to split it up this way, and here's how we're going to do it. And so we've actually talked about using our year-end gifts as instead of doing a capital campaign, using them as our capital campaign and doing like 3 big pushes. Does that make sense? And it would be less money, I'm sure, and whatever, but it would be clear. It wouldn't take over so much of our church's life and so on, and it might end up being beneficial. The last thing I'll say is that right now we're working on a plan with Impact Christian Schools that Mike is one of the staff people for, to be prepared to start a K-8 school there. One of the reasons why the church was excited about us is that we have the capacity to start a school. When they first built La Petite, they didn't build it so that they could have some daycare center over there that was secular. They built it because they wanted to have a Christian school. That was always their dream. And they were like, yeah, this is a dream that just grew sick in our hearts. We just never could do it. And we're like, well, we have a school consortium we started. Would you want to start a school? They were like, oh my gosh, are you serious? Because we built that building dreaming it would be a school. Right. And so Chuck has kind of been working on that plan and how we would scale up that school from starting with a couple classrooms and up. So it's very possible. We know Karis is going to move out at some point. We could start the school in the building without La Petite moving and then scale it up over time. So there's already kind of like a schooling plan over there. We've already been talking with some leaders, some overflow, whether we would do a highly multi-ethnic school or just like whoever lives in that area, McFarland school, Christian school. We're not sure yet. So there is a schooling plan over there that's Christian for the long term. That's a subset of this whole issue. ICS is a whole nother animal that's been incredibly successful. There's tons of testimonies about it that I can't share tonight, but if La Petite pulled out, that would actually not be a bad thing for us. It would be a little tight in the short term, but it would actually be, I don't want to say it would be a blessing, but it would not be as bad as it might sound in terms of cash flow over the longer term. So we're already working on that issue. Like what happens when Karis and La Petite move out? We're already working on it. Yeah.
My question is, you touched on it just a little bit with that last answer, but concretely, what happens if we vote no?
If we vote no, then I resign. No, I'm just kidding. So if we vote no, then there's a couple of options. What I will take note of is that the church doesn't want me to spend staffing time that we pay for over there, and that they don't want me to spend our money over there. And that whatever happens has to happen independently of the ministries that we're doing at High Point Church. And so what we probably would do is Mike and I would probably go have breakfast and be like, okay, what are we going to do? Because I'm not going to walk away from this like entirely. Okay, if I have to do this on the side to like find leadership and figure out how to help them get continuity over there, they already have 70 people over there. Like we've got people who haven't been doing ministry who are now preaching over there. Like something's already happening. So I've already given up my tree business. If I have to spend that time helping that, and if Mike has to do a little, Mike always works more than 40 hours a week. If we have to do some stuff over there to get some sort of transitional leadership over there, we'll probably do that. But we'll do it completely independently of the ministry that we do here after we do all the ministry that we're required to do here. And no staff time from here will get used over there at all, except for people who also feel that way and want to volunteer in addition to make something happen.
I know that this is a vote that could just be a straight majority, but do you have in your head, like, if we get less than 75% or then that's too many people who don't want to do it and maybe we need to rethink? Or are you going to say, like, if we get 52% yes, we're doing that? Just wondering if you've thought about that.
Talk about it Tuesday. Somebody put that on there.
Oh, Monty said that that's on our agenda for Tuesday. So you're just going to get my answer for that. My answer is that we're probably 7 years late taking on the responsibility of planning a church. And so principally, I believe that. So I have been very clear with the elders. I said at the beginning, because I feel very strongly about this. I said, listen, if you say no as the elders, or if the congregation says no, I will not resign. I do not know what I will do. I don't know how to go on in this kind of situation if the church doesn't want to plant a church. I wouldn't know emotionally and spiritually what to do or how to function. I don't think it's going to happen because I think High Point is I think people will probably say yes, but I've agreed. I've already said, listen, I'm not gonna, because I just wouldn't know what to do. Does that make sense? But I think that so if a significant percentage, I would say probably more than 25% votes against it, it'll be kind of devastating for me personally, because I believe that the standing orders of Jesus to make disciples and the complete demonstration of his apostles to do that by building churches, particularly in urban centers, to make a witness for the gospel in the surrounding region, is so absolute in the New Testament that this is our standing work, and we can do it. Like I just don't get it. It's like I'm a robot that I don't have a circuit for that, right? And so for me, I would just be like, listen, if it's only 75, we're still doing it. We're doing it. Like this is the thing to do. But I think the important thing is that, man, I'm not slamming the football on anybody. I'm not going to spike the football on anybody or yell at anybody, right? Like High Point has people who act in good faith, and they do what they think is right. And sometimes people are like, yeah, I'm just like some of the fear was like, could we pay for stuff here? Like, is High Point going to suffer? And it's like, well, yeah, of course High Point's going to suffer. That's a given. Forever we're going to suffer. But you know what I mean? But like some people are like, but man, we have something really good here. And you could risk that. This could come apart. Don't you see that? And that's true. And I have for years borrowed against this church, right? Like we've given away $2.5 million. We could have done all these carpets. We didn't have to support those minority churches and help them buy their buildings and like help people keep their apartments when they would have lost them in COVID. We didn't have to do all that stuff. We could have had great carpets here and faster internet and better coffee, and better salaries. And we just didn't. And on one level, I know I'm being sarcastic, but another level, but we could have done that. Everybody who works on staff here deserves more money. They do. And we could have given it to them, and we didn't, right? And I know that. I know I've borrowed against this place to do this broader kingdom vision. I know a lot of that chafes some people because they're like, Nick, you didn't have to give it all away. You could have given 70% of it away. We could have done some really good things here. And I realize those proportions are like in the ether of our subjectivity spiritually. You know what I mean? So you know how I feel. But man, I'm not going to be, if you raised your hand, if we had a raise your hand vote against it, and I saw everybody that voted against it, I'm never going to be like, oh, you're the person. I remember the Flatmeyers left, but I remember Ellen Flatmeyer having a conflict with a former pastor here. And she wasn't mean, and she just wasn't with something. And she spoke up. And the next time she talked to this pastor, he goes, oh, you were the one. Right? I will, God help me, I will never do that. You know what I mean? So I think that part of solidarity is not just that we all agree. Part of solidarity is accepting each other when we disagree. Does that make sense? And doing but we purposely do together. Or even maybe we do something a little bit separately. Maybe, like, let's say we voted 25% for it and 75% against it. Maybe the 25% of us are still going to do some stuff on the side. Like a lot of us support missionaries on the side. Maybe some of us will do some stuff on the side, still committed to High Point Church, but to make sure that church goes. But we still love everybody here, and we'll still do everything else with everybody here. Does that make sense? I think so. For me, part of solidarity is accepting what other people say, even if it hurts me, right? If I know they're doing it in good faith and in real faith. So I'm not concerned about the vote and the percentage. Yes or no, or what percentage is.
I guess I was curious if there was a point where we go, ooh, that's a lot that don't, even though it passed, do we have to?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, if it's below 70%, it'll worry me. Yeah.
Real quick, this actually came up at the elder meeting when there was some questions of if one elder didn't feel like this was the right decision. And it came back to, no, we need to find out why that one elder didn't feel that this was God's will for us to do this moving forward. So I think that we would follow that same thing here, as if we had 25% that said didn't want to move forward on this. Well, what's the reason? What's the thing? And we probably would go back and do some soul searching and look at what are the reasons why 25% or 5 or 10 or whatever that didn't really want to move forward.
Yeah, I think the big difference about our democracy as a church and the democracy we're currently experiencing during like football game commercials is our job is to completely listen to the dissenting arguments. And to steel man them, not straw man them, to listen to the objection and to take it on because there's probably something right about it, right? As opposed to misrepresent their argument, say that they're stupid, you should vote against them and belittle them and divide us. Does that make sense? And so the goal on the other board was, as David said, like, what are the arguments against it? What's the best version of arguments against it? Because even if we decide to do it, these are the problems we're going to have to solve. Right. And so my goal is that's why we always want to listen to the minority dissenting voice, is because they're probably right about the problems. And these are the problems we're going to have to solve when we get our majority way. Does that make sense? So we want to make sure that if it was 25%, 75%, 25% against, that we listen to that 25%. Because it's the problems they're bringing up that's going to be the majority of the problems that we're going to deal with. I think the thing that you'll find with this is if people are against it, the things that they're going to say against it, everybody who's for it is going to be like, you're right. That is a real liability. These are the real difficulties. You are correct. That's not the question of the judgment of should we go forward. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a quick follow-up to the question I asked when I said, what happens if we vote no? I guess the question would be, what is I don't want to say like what's the exact wording, but like what are we actually voting on? Because it does seem like do we have the exact...
Steve, have you been able to find the motion?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I was doing something.
Yeah, can you just read that for us? Yeah.
So because it's an elder board, it's not as straightforward, just one motion. So I'm going to give you two motions from two different meetings so you understand how we did this. Let me get the first one up first. Oh, I got a thumb. All right. So the first motion was at the meeting of October 1st. And sorry, I have to go all the way down.
Steven, we want to know the motion that's going to be presented to the church.
We don't have that one since we have a couple of items on the agenda for this week.
Lloyd has what may be proposed.
Yeah, we have some proposed ones, but the first one, so where we start is we move that HPC receive the offered property contents, ministry intent, and associated lease with La Petite in accordance with a long name of a document. This includes the assumption of responsibility for the current mortgage balance of approximately $290,000, responsibility for mission commitments of $120,000 over 4 years, and any income or expenses incurred in order to accept the building and initiate ministry activity. The reason I gave you that one first is it's rooted, the one that will become the final motion goes.
That was when the elders voted to go forward, but the plan was still to take ownership of the building. He's going to read you the one from the subsequent meeting where we changed how we were going to skin the cat, but still skinning the cat.
Skinning cats. And it involves a document. So that's part of the motion, and that's what's going to be shared with the congregation. The board moves to approve the adjusted Crossroads strategy. So we had a Crossroads strategy, that first vote. We now have an adjusted Crossroads strategy, which includes assumption of leadership under an organizational management agreement. Details of the agreement with the Crossroads 501c3 organization will be reviewed and approved by the HPC Board of Elders prior to completion of the agreement. The intent of this agreement is to utilize the existing 501c3 organization in combination with new leadership to reestablish a functioning church at Crossroads location. So that's a big, long motion.
So we're going to vote on a management takeover. That's what we're doing. You're approving a management takeover of Crossroads Church.
We also, at that same time, we voted to allow for voting. If we do need to do a budget amendment to bring before the congregation, we also voted that we could vote on that electronically. So I haven't seen I haven't, as elders, to bring to the congregation. I have not seen yet any budget amendment for that. So as of right now, I don't think we have one.
I have two quick things. So I spoke out, I believe, with some concern the last, I don't know how many congregational meetings. But I just want to say through the whole process that you all have done in terms of creating transparency and talking through the process publicly and in one-on-one conversations, like I feel great about this. I'm excited about this. I'm encouraged, especially for the folks that are over there and hearing how they're talking about it. I know you didn't have to take a vote on this. I just want to say thank you. I think it says a lot about the character of the men on the elder board and the pastors to be able to say, we want to be above reproach and we want to actually allow for the congregation to vote. If you weren't going to vote, I'd still be great. I love it. We're talking about an HVAC in the gym and stuff like that. And something came to mind while we were sitting here, just knowing how much is going on with our staff and the extension with our staff at the school. So, Jeff and his health and knowing Dr. Anderson and his health and the loss of it feels like there's a lot going on, which is the counseling equivalent of an HVAC going on in the gym. I just want to hear, if there's something that we can do to help support families in that, or if you all have any concern at all about just the additional capacities and things that you'll need over the next few weeks, given there's a counseling HVAC feeling of going out in that side of the building in terms of counseling right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's some real medical tragedies in particular going on at the school. I prayed with Luke before he went public with his issues. They don't know a ton yet. For those of you who don't know, Luke Anderson, who is the principal at the school, found out that he has tumors all over his body. And he doesn't know how aggressive the cancer is, but it just looks real bad. And it was pretty devastating for him, obviously his family. And he's been so great as the principal of our school so far. Just incredible spirit and leadership and so on. And it's really, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. And so, and then there's some other things too with some kids and whatever. So there's also some incredible bright spots in my daughter's class. There's a girl whose single mom is dying of cancer. She's about to pass away. And I talked with a woman in our church today. Their family's adopting this child so she can continue at High Point. So she comes right into a family. And there's two kids, right? Yeah. One of them was in my daughter's class, but there's an older sibling too, right? Yeah. And so was really heartwarming for me to see that in the midst of this tragedy, this family adopting these two children that are going to be orphans. It's a beautiful, and most of their family is from one of the Central American countries, so their grandparents are thousands of miles away. But yeah, it's this is going to sound cavalier, Tony, and I'm sorry, but Mike and I and Adam and to extension, the people who help us, like Annette, we've always got 1,000 of these problems, and they're always there's always some percentage of them that are terrible, and it's just this is just Thursday for us, So we've been juggling these kinds of balls our whole ministries, and I can tell you, I mean, I won't tell you obviously, but like I can tell you all the marriages on the brink of divorce. I can tell you all the people who are struggling at their jobs. I can, you know, and all the people whose health is collapsing. And please be praying for Luke Anderson and his family and for the other medical issues, particular medical issues at the school right now. And for this family, Ori and her sibling who are going to be adopted and who's losing her mom. And yeah, we have hope in the midst of tragedy and difficulty for sure.
Yeah, specifically, I'm a member of the CAC, which is basically overseeing school board for the school. And Chris is on there with me. And I don't know if I see anybody else, but it's something that we've talked about as a support agency for Luke specifically. And we have, matter of fact, we were going to get a meeting on, we were going to talk to him, we were going to fix everything that day, we were going to help him and tell him exactly what God's going to do for him. And we were going to take care of it, you know, being the good Christian men and women that we are. He said, hold off, we're good. Let me get where we're at. But we are very much in support of Luke, what he does, what he has done, and we're going to come alongside him and support him and his family, whatever we need to do, whatever we're able to do. And we've already talked about it. So it's already in the works from a support standpoint. So you got a question?
So I had a question about is it published on the website? So my understanding was that the elder board was not unanimous about Crossroads. Is that correct?
Correct. At the meeting where we voted on it, it was 10-2. On the first 11-2 on the first vote.
So is it published about the dissenting opinions about why? Is that?
I don't think that's published. Both of those men are present if they would wish to speak. The second vote where we didn't take on the building, I think was unanimous among the elders present. But in the first iteration of it, the two men who voted against it had objections, and they're both present if they want to say something.
Yeah, it was primarily around debt and staffing load. And the second vote, which was to not acquire them, but to work off their 501c3 and such. And part of the reason too is when in 3 to 4 years, when they're established, if we take them on and put them under our tax ID and everything, we're going to have to undo that to release them as their own autonomous church, which has always been the intent. And we don't want to be in the business of owning churches. We want to be in the business of blessing churches. And as Frank Pekovich said, this second plan where we're not taking ownership fits our DNA because we've blessed churches, we've blessed pastors without owning them. And it allows us to continue to do that. And so the two that voted no were, from my memory, fairly enthusiastic about going forward when we dismissed the issues of debt and that ownership was going to create. Does that make sense?
So what happened to that elder that just stepped off the road
A year before they stepped off.
What happened to them?
Did you ask their opinion?
One of them sitting right there.
And their opinion now that it's changed?
Because his term was up. His term would be up in this next June, and then figured into his decision not to continue as an elder right now.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything?
Well, I can address if there's a question. I mean, I would probably want to, at the time.
Was considering going to police, right?
I would have considered myself to be a no vote. And that, since that time, I think my position has changed, and I think my position has changed largely on the basis of the fact that we're not looking to acquire property. I think the liabilities of acquisition of property, particularly in the line of having an owner owns, was sufficient enough to make me not want to do this, because we are not in the business of acquiring property, we're in the business of the gospels. I think now with this change, and again, with the assumption that we're being transparent about the costs, because Jesus said, only a fool goes out and tries to build a tower. It doesn't count the cost. And as long as you understand what you're getting yourself into, you can make an informed decision. That's fair. And that's all I ever want. I think so from my perspective, as long as that's clear and that's widely available, clearly and easily available to people so they can understand it, I'm totally fine.
Yeah, just the other person on the other board that came off was Nick Forrester, was our main finance guy. He was quite skeptical, especially when we were going to acquire the property. I don't know his particular views. He's stayed pretty much like that. I've asked him, hey, do you want to come back for that vote? Do you want to stay informed? He was like, no, I stepped away on purpose. Because he's dealing with stuff personally, and some job with his family. So, but he was skeptical. I actually expected that he could be a no vote in the first version where we were going to acquire the property. So in that vote, if these two guys hadn't stepped off, there could have been 4 no votes. That was a possibility. But as Paul said, as we changed the dynamic for how we were going to do it, that functioned to change his vote. I don't know if the other 2 men would have changed their position on that.
One of the things that may reassure people to some degree is there is an operating reserve that we have as well that I think is on the order of $200,000. And so if for whatever reason people left High Point and went there when we weren't meeting our budget there, we have reserves for that as well.
Yeah, so I was one of the ones that said no, voted on the first no, and that was what they're saying is accurate. My primary concern is the help for our staff and some of our management techniques and stuff like that. That this is going to become its own separate thing. It's going to alleviate that and not be put on. As long as that is true, I'm all for this new way we're going to do it. I like that idea much better. That makes sense. I definitely don't think all our problems are going away. I still think we have stuff to deal with, if that makes sense. But the way they're proposing it now, I'm for it.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's polite to leave a town hall at any time if you want to. So I know people are going, it's totally fine, of course.
The other concern was staffing. I know today, in today's service, we were 100% contained inside of the people that have chosen to go there. Worship team, prayer team, Sunday school teachers, nursery. It was all people that there were no staff or input from the staff in today's service. That was amendment the first, and we haven't started yet.
Okay, this is your last chance. Vaughn. Okay.
Will it be called Crossroads still?
That's still up in the air. Yeah, it's actually not a bad name. They're right at the meeting point of 51 and the belt line that they're at a crossroads is kind of apropos. Rick DeYoung really wants to call it Dutch Mill, which is even more Dutch, obviously. He is Dutch, but he's like, that's the Dutch Mill area. We could call it High Point Dutch Mill, but we're not going to call it High Point anything. And so signs cost like $30,000. So I don't know. Right now it's Crossroads. Yeah. All right, guys, I know some of the elders will stay a little longer if you want to say anything personally. Is there anything you didn't want to say out loud? I'll be here for a few more minutes. Thank you so much for caring and for coming. And remember, when we say, look, voting your conscience on this is part of congregationalism, we mean that. I expect there to be some no votes, and we're going to still be together when this is done. Thanks so much for coming, guys.